So you've been in an accident and you were hit by an uninsured driver. What should you do? Well, the first thing you should do is call and tell your car insurance company. But I'm going to talk a lot about these kind of cases and why there's some extra procedural hoops you have to jump through and why you probably need to talk to a lawyer. My name is Michael Coker. I'm a personal injury lawyer in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and unfortunately, we are seeing more and more uninsured drivers on the roadway, which means more and more people are getting involved in an accident where there's no insurance. If that happens to you, there's some specific things that you need to do based on the type of case. And so I'm going to explain the different types of cases here, and you can learn a little bit more about what to do in your specific case and whether you should call a lawyer. There's two types of uninsured cases in Georgia. One's called an uninsured motorist claim. One's called an underinsured motorist claim. An uninsured motorist claim happens in one of two situations. One, where you're involved in a car accident, you know who the other driver is, and that driver has no insurance coverage for one reason or another. The second way is if you're hit by someone in a hit and run and they never find the driver. That driver is also considered uninsured. Underinsured motorist coverage is when the other driver doesn't have enough insurance to cover all of your medical bills, pain and suffering, and lost wages from an accident. So we're going to talk about the three of those and what you need to do in each one of those situations. Let's start with the first one and the most common situation, which is where you're hit by a driver and you find out that driver has no insurance. Now, this really happens for two reasons. One, either the other driver never actually went and purchased insurance, or two, you have a situation where the other driver had coverage denied. Meaning, let's say somebody was driving the vehicle that wasn't supposed to be driving the vehicle. Maybe they were excluded from the policy. That's what's called a coverage denial. And what that means is that the insurance company says, yes, there might have been insurance coverage on this vehicle, but we're not going to provide coverage because somebody on the policy was doing what they were not supposed to be doing. And in both of those situations, you have a situation where you have a driver who basically has no coverage. And so what should you do? Well, the first thing you should do is notify your insurance company, because you may have on your policy something called uninsured motorist coverage. Now, uninsured motorist coverage is basically a coverage on your policy for this exact situation, that if you're hit by someone who does not have insurance or is not covered by insurance, your insurance company will step in and will provide coverage for you for that accident. Now, here's a weird thing. Just because it's your insurance company doesn't mean they're your friend. In fact, here's a little industry secret. Your insurance company might actually end up representing the driver that hit you that was uninsured. That's a weird thing in Georgia law that we do, and people are shocked about that. Well, I paid this insurance company. I paid my premiums. Why are they representing the person that hit me? Because they have a right to step in and what's called defend in the name of the other driver, which means they can defend that other driver against you, even though it's your insurance policy. It makes no sense. It's a legal fiction is what we call it. But the reality is your insurance company is not looking out for your best interest. They're trying to pay as little as possible, and they might even step in and represent the other person against you to make that happen. And so I always recommend, if you're involved in an accident where you have an uninsured driver or the other driver's insurance has denied coverage, you probably want to speak to an experienced personal injury lawyer who understands the complexities of these type of cases, because these cases are extremely complicated. There's specific hoops that you have to jump through with your insurance. And if you don't follow every one of the requirements, both under Georgia law and in your policy, you can forever lose your right to access that coverage later. And so the only way to truly protect yourself if you're hit by somebody with no insurance is to call an experienced lawyer who understands insurance. And so That's kind of a basic overview of basically the first type of case where you're hit with a vehicle who either has no insurance or ultimately coverage is denied and you need to make an uninsured motorist claim through your policy. And your policy would step in, your policy would negotiate, and your policy would basically pay the claim. The second scenario I mentioned is when you have an insurance policy where ultimately, or you have a car accident situation where you're hit by a driver who does not stick around, who flees the accident scene. And the police come, they do an investigation, but ultimately they never find the other driver. That is another situation. It's called a John Doe situation, where you still don't know who the other driver is, and so therefore there's no insurance that's afforded to you. Again, your car insurance company would then step in and provide coverage under your uninsured motorist policy to take care of that situation. Now, again, there's very specific requirements of what you must do in order to get uninsured motorist coverage in this situation. One, generally in Georgia, you have to have a police report. You have to report it. You have to call the police because they're going to have a very difficult time paying the claim if you are not willing to call the police and basically put your reputation on the line and for falsifying a police report for a real accident that actually happened. Two, generally there has to be some evidence that the accident actually happened, whether that's paint transfer between the vehicles, damage to the vehicles, a camera that captured the accident, something to prove to the insurance company that the accident did in fact happen. So that's two very important things in these type of cases that you need to do. One, when you're involved in a hit and run accident, call the police immediately. And then two, document as best you can through photographs, video, anything you have to prove that the accident actually happened. And then what you can do is then you can call your insurance company, submit this documentation, submit the police report, and show them that you were involved in an accident, the person fled the scene, and then your uninsured motorist coverage should step in. The third and kind of final kind of time that uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage comes in is when the other driver does not have enough insurance. Let's say that you're basically hit by someone who's driving around with the state minimum in Georgia, which is $25,000. And let's say you take an ambulance, you go to the hospital, they do multiple CT scans, and your hospital bill's $100,000. If the other driver only has $25,000 in insurance, the state minimum, then your underinsured motorist coverage might stack on top, basically to give you more coverage to cover that $100,000 medical bill. So in those specific situations, you might have one of two types of policies in Georgia. One is called add-on coverage of or underinsured motorist coverage. The second is reduced by coverage. And the only way you're going to know which one you have is basically look at your policy. And so it's going to determine how these coverages, whether it stacks on top of the 25 that the other driver has, or whether your insurance company can subtract the amount of liability coverage that the other driver has from what they owe you. And this is a complicated area of the law. So if you're in an underinsured motorist situation, no question, you need to talk to a lawyer because coverages in Georgia typically stack on top of each other. So you might have multiple policies with coverage that would stack and provide more coverage that's available to you. And the only way you're going to know exactly what amount of coverage you have and you're entitled to is to speak with an experienced personal injury lawyer who understands how these stack, who know the right letters to send to get a correct copy of your policy, to determine whether it's an add-on or reduced by policy, and to basically do the math so you understand, hey, this is the maximum amount of insurance that I have available. This is exactly what I'm entitled to. And these are all aspects of car insurance that get extremely complicated. If you have a injury lawyer who does this regularly, who this is their specialty, this is all they do, they're going to understand uninsured motorist coverage, how it stacks, what's necessary, how much money you're going to be entitled to. and you're going to be able to use that experience and that knowledge to your advantage. If you hire, unfortunately, somebody who doesn't understand these types of cases, who doesn't fully do these, let's say they're a general practitioner and they take on your personal injury claim, their failure to take the proper steps and to understand how coverage stacks and relies on one policy to another and the relationship between those two, you might be leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table in your specific case. And so one of the most pressing things that I will tell you is, one, definitely speak to an attorney if you have a uninsured or an underinsured situation, to make sure that you're protected and that every T is crossed and I is dotted. But two, don't just hire any lawyer, because again, insurance is extremely complicated. All you need to do is get a copy of your insurance policy and you can see that for yourself. And only those lawyers that have been doing this like me for, years and years and years, are going to understand the kind of nuances and the requirements that are necessary for these types of cases. And so if you have an uninsured motorist coverage or an underinsured motorist coverage and you have questions, give us a call. It's totally free, doesn't cost you anything, and you might just get your questions answered and be able to take care of the case yourself. But at least you'll know, at least you'll have some understanding of what you're dealing with in your specific case, what requirements you need to do to ensure that you're protected. And so if you like getting these updates and learning a little about Georgia law, insurance law, and how they kind of interact with each other, like and subscribe. I appreciate all of you. Keep the comments coming. You've been very kind and discussing the type of things that we talk about and asking questions. So if you have a question that you want to hear me answer on the podcast, shoot it to us. We'd be more than happy to hear it and answer your questions here live on our podcast. So again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.